Now, at least one person has been confirmed dead in Russia after an airliner made an emergency landing in flames. Let's cross over to Mariam Namazi now with more on that story from our European Broadcast Centre. Mariam, over to you.
Yes, that's right, Darren. We've been watching these images of the plane just taking off from Sheremetyevo airport north of Moscow, bound for Murmansk. When a fire broke out shortly after takeoff, the pilots had to then turn around and make an emergency landing with at least one of the engines seemingly on fire. Now, there have been Russian media reports saying that there were 78 people on board. Many of them were able to escape, but there are reports of at least one death and between 5 and 10 injuries. Well, those are just some of the images that we've been watching. Joining us now over Skype is Anil Padhra. He's the head of aviation at the University of West London and a qualified aerospace engineer. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. What are your initial thoughts on this? The plane had to make an emergency landing after a fire broke out on board. Obviously, the cause is not clear, but what are your initial observations?
Just looking at the incident, looking at the pictures and trying to get all the facts, the actual proven facts that we know about the aircraft, it's difficult to say, but it appears that a fire broke out on board the aircraft at some point within the first half an hour of the aircraft taking off. The radar images show that the aircraft took off, circled Moscow for a while before it attempted its emergency landing. We are getting a few reports that the pilots indicated that there might have been radio failure to start off with, and then they indicated that there was an emergency on board. It doesn't appear that the pilots communicated the emergency with the ground verbally. I think the amount of work involved once they knew that the emergency was taking place would have been quite high. It looks as if the pilots did extremely well in trying to land the aircraft back at the airport, even with the aircraft on fire. It's difficult to say what could have been the cause of the fire, but it's I think important to realize that the aircraft had taken off fairly quick. That it would have been full of quite a lot of fuel, which wouldn't have helped. And of course, the pictures that we can see from the airport is that most of the back of the aircraft is on fire, and that many of the passengers would have evacuated from the front of the aircraft.
Yes, and I wanted to ask you about that because I don't think we know yet how many crew are on board, but 78 passengers on board the plane. Many of them managed to escape through the emergency exits. Is that feasible to you, or might there be, is it your expectation that there could be more fatalities?
Well, when the aircraft was certified a couple of years back, as part of the certification process, the manufacturer has to prove that the aircraft can be evacuated. And with this particular aircraft, it demonstrated that it could be evacuated within 73 seconds with maximum capacity, which is about 95 passengers. So with slightly less passengers, it's perfectly possible for all the passengers to evacuate within a minute or two from the aircraft. The challenge here is that with an aircraft on fire, it usually isn't the fire that's the issue, it's the smoke that fills up within the cabin very, very quickly, which causes a reduction in the evacuation time. Sorry, an increase in the evacuation time, slowing the process down a little bit. But it appears that many of the passengers did evacuate. It's unclear at the moment if there are any fatalities or how many of those people that survived have been injured and to what extent.
Russian investigators are saying that they have opened now an investigation. They're looking at whether pilots had breached air safety rules. Could this have been mechanical failure, or might it have been a human error?
It's difficult to say at this stage. I think as part of any aircraft accident investigation, the investigators have to look at every possible cause. The reality is that the flight data recorders will be taken from the aircraft. They will be analysed. Hopefully, the fire that has taken place has not damaged the flight data recorders, that you will be able to figure out the cause very, very quickly. It's unlikely that human error would have caused something like this. It's more likely that it might have been mechanical failure, but it's difficult to assess at this stage what would have been the cause. But it does appear that the pilots were aware of the incident and that they did their best to get the aircraft back onto the ground and back to the airport, which is what they did. And of course, to evacuate the aircraft would have been their priority as soon as the aircraft landed.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for sharing your insight with us. Do appreciate it. Anil Padhra, Head of Aviation at the University of West London. Well, we'll bring you more on this story a bit later on in about 40 minutes' time now. Back to Darren in Doha.